Welcome to the Vintage Athlete Podcast, specially designed for retired athletes. I'm your host, Tara Fortier. I'm a master's level licensed and board certified behavior analyst, yoga and meditation teacher, nutrition coach, and now mom of 2 athletes. But most importantly, I'm just like you, a retired athlete doing life after sport. Whether it's trying new things that you might be bad at, learning how to feed and exercise your post-sport body without kicking your own butt, or figuring out how to fill that giant hole in your life that used to be filled with practices, coaches, teammates, and the adrenaline rush of your sport, I'm going to drop some unconventional knowledge and strategies on you and do it from a place of love and acceptance. We'll tackle solutions from a unique perspective rooted in mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy. If you're a retired athlete looking to create a fulfilling and empowered life beyond your sport, this show is for you. This is the Vintage Athlete Podcast, your game plan for life after sports. So lace up for your next adventure and we'll transition, redefine, and evolve together. Hello there, all of my vintage athletes. Welcome to the latest episode of the Vintage Athlete Podcast. Today, our topic is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Maybe you've heard it before. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And this is something that applies to everybody, not just former athletes, but in the case of former athletes, I do think this advice is particularly relevant. It's a path to move forward and embrace a new way of life and new experiences that are, well, uncomfortable. And at least they might be at first. Because athletes spend so much time perfecting their craft, their sport, it becomes part of your life. And then to go outside of that and do other things when you actually have time to do them after you retire from your sport can be very uncomfortable and very daunting and very overwhelming. But if you never go outside of your comfort zone, then you may never contact opportunities that have the chance to make a major impact on your life in a positive way. So let's talk about how to purposely lean into discomfort in service of finding what brings you fulfillment and joy in your post-sport life. So let's start by talking about what is comfortable for athletes. One of the first things that comes to mind for me is being an expert at your sport, right? That's something that's very comfortable for an athlete. Receiving recognition and accolades for high performance. That's something that's very comfortable for athletes as well. A structured routine and clear guidance and expectations from coaches and trainers. And doing something that you're good at in front of a crowd, in front of an audience, in front of a large group of people. Athletes tend to be pretty comfortable with that. Right? So these are some of the things that we get to experience as athletes that become an everyday part of our lives and things that we become very used to and probably would call comfortable. So then let's talk about the flip side of that. So what would be uncomfortable for athletes? So just jumping off of that last one that we talked about with being comfortable, I don't think former athletes are comfortable doing something that they're not good at in front of a crowd, something new, something that they've never done before. That, at least for me, would be very uncomfortable as a former athlete. Another thing that might be uncomfortable is respecting and loving your changed body, right? Our bodies change after we retire from sport. There's no preventing that. And being able to love and accept and be comfortable in that body is very hard, right? So that becomes very uncomfortable for a retired athlete. Being mediocre, right? Not being the best at something can be something super uncomfortable for former athletes. Just like being new at something, being a newbie and potentially sucking at it. That's something that I think as former athletes, we don't seek out because it's not something we're used to doing. Doing a new physical activity that you're not good at. right? We all had our sport, and that involved a particular physical skill set. And so that doesn't always translate to other physical activities. So doing physical activities, other sports that you may not be good at can be overwhelming, can be something that we try to avoid. Doing something amazing or incredible without an audience to witness it. I think this is something that, we're used to playing games or going to competitions or whatever our sport involves and doing it in front of other people, right? Whether that is our family or our teammates, our coaches, the other team, whoever else ends up being there. You were a professional athlete. There was likely fans that came to games or competitions. So to do something great with your body without having somebody to witness it can be uncomfortable. A couple other things that I think are a challenge would be hanging out with non-athletes, right? Other athletes get us. There are people. And to start to try to connect and interact with people that maybe don't have that same perspective as we do can be difficult. uh, Exercising in a way that feels like it's not training or it's not hard work, right? Just doing some exercise that you don't have that goal or that outcome in mind of I'm going to get better at my sport. I'm going to play better. I'm going to be stronger for this particular aspect of my sport. And then finally, having to manage their fitness and wellness on their own. Athletes are very used to having people help them with that, right? And supporting them and giving them what they need to do in order to make that happen. And so when you reach the point where you have to figure out how to manage that on your own, that can be really difficult and challenging. I thought it was good to just kind of set the stage of talking about for specifically for athletes or for former athletes, what things would be comfortable and what things maybe would be more uncomfortable. Um, so as an athlete, you probably had some drills or conditioning or something that your coach had you do that you hated, right? I know I did. Gymnastics is full of those. I did it because it made me better at my sport. That's why I did it. I had a reason. I had a really good reason to do something that was uncomfortable that I didn't like. So when improving your athletic abilities is no longer the motivation, when you retire from your sport, you may think, well, why do something if I hate it, right? If I don't have that outcome to work for. And think about all the reasons you've come up with about why you would avoid or why you wouldn't do certain things. Because we all tell ourselves stories, right? Of like, oh, well, I can't do that because that's not going to help me with this particular skill, right? You tell yourself these things. And so think about those stories, those reasons that you've come up with. Um, and then think about what could possibly happen if you did those things anyway, right? What if you leaned into being uncomfortable and do something that is uncomfortable anyway? So you might ask yourself, well, why would I do that? It means confronting fears and doubts and potentially experiencing setbacks. Well, what if there was something very important to you and the way to get it is by doing something outside of your comfort zone? It will require you to face some uncertainty, to challenge yourself in a new way, and maybe something that's completely unfamiliar to you. But what's on the other side of that may be worth it. So, what if you did it anyway? What if you took a chance and did something that maybe gave you uncomfortable thoughts or feelings or made you tell yourself a bunch of reasons why you shouldn't do it? What if you did that anyway? You never know what could come out of those experiences. And that's how we grow and that's how we evolve is by going outside of our comfort zone. And this is something that people talk about all the time, but I do think the coming at it from the perspective of a former athlete, it's just a little extra. It's a little different. There's like a little something else there. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this topic specifically for vintage athletes. So Hopefully by now you're asking yourself, so how can I embrace purposely being uncomfortable? How do I do that? How do I motivate myself to do that? And it's not easy. Okay. It's not easy for a former athlete who's used to excelling at their sport and the challenges that come with it. And the idea of experiencing something unfamiliar that you may not be good at or even know how to do is just not that appealing. So let's talk about how you do it anyway, right? How do you get over that? How do you lean into that discomfort? So, one of the first things you can do is to recognize that purposely doing something uncomfortable is something you probably did as an athlete. It took on the form of your sport, but you probably did these things. As a gymnast, I started my sport at a very young age. And you do a lot of learning and growth in gymnastics when you're young, when you're small, when your body is one of a young child. And one of the reasons why this happens is because when you're young, you don't have much fear about doing crazy gymnastics tricks. I was that kid. I would pretty much try anything. And I remember my coach saying, Tara, like, go try this crazy skill you've never done before, just go. And I would just go for it. Sometimes I did it successfully and sometimes I didn't, but I would always try. And it's important to say here that my coach thought I had the ability to do it in a way that I wasn't likely to get hurt. My coach never asked me to do something where there was a good chance that I was going to do something that was going to injure myself. So I just want to say that first. Don't go doing crazy, reckless things that have a good chance of getting you injured. But just in retrospect, I know that wasn't the case. But at the time, I didn't really know that as a young kid, and I had no fear. So I would just chuck it. I would just go. And I think my coaches were actually pretty amused by it. But it worked to my favor because I learned a lot of new skills that way. But as I got older, so maybe around like 11 or 12, I started to understand the risk level of the skills that I was doing and that I could actually get really hurt um, doing some of these things. And I started to develop that fear. And I think if you talk to a gymnast, and this is just because that's my perspective, this probably is the case in other sports as well. But if you talk to a gymnast who continued the sport into their teenage years, and as I got older, they often have that moment that they remember of when they realize their fear, when they realize like, ooh, that's kind of scary. And I'm not sure I want to do that. When I started to actually develop that fear, my pace of learning new skills slowed down significantly because I wasn't willing to try things. Because I had this fear that, I was going to get hurt or that I wasn't going to do it right or that, somebody was going to laugh at me or whatever my stories were at the time. And that fear was my mind trying to protect me, which I appreciate. That's what minds do. But in gymnastics, if I wanted to continue to progress, I needed to try new skills anyway, even if they made me fearful or uncomfortable. So I did. I did a lot of them anyway, and I continued to progress. So I did do these things as an athlete. I did lean into discomfort and I did come out better on the other side, even though it was uncomfortable and stressful in the moment. And when you realize that you've actually worked through discomfort in your sport, it makes doing it outside of sports less overwhelming and uncertain, and it increases your motivation to lean into it anyway. So I encourage you to reflect on your experiences as an athlete and think about those times where you really did get comfortable with being uncomfortable and that you did work through those things and what was the positive outcome on the other side. So that is the first thing that you can do to kind of get over that hump and really start to lean into this. The second thing you can do is to redefine what you think discomfort is. So, as humans, we have this way of always striving to feel happy and positive and comfortable all the time. And we think that if we're not feeling this way as much as possible, then we're doing something wrong or that there's something wrong with us. But experiencing discomfort and other negative experiences that we may have is a normal part of being human. While it doesn't feel as good as feeling happy, it happens to all of us. And if we're constantly trying to avoid feeling negative in any way, that's our focus is to never feel slightly bad. Um, then we're setting ourselves up for stress and anxiety and missing out on potential positive outcomes on the other side of that discomfort. So, looking at discomfort as a negative feeling, it might make you feel like you're failing if you're experiencing it, right? Like, this is making me worried or anxious or fearful or whatever. And so, I failed. I'm now not doing what I'm supposed to do because I feel this negative feeling. And so what I want you to do instead is to redefine discomfort as a feeling you experience when growth is happening. So embrace discomfort as an opportunity rather than a setback. View it as a signal that you're evolving as a person. So when you lean into discomfort in the interest of experiencing something new, you're taking action toward a fulfilling life as a retired athlete rather than one that's stuck in their old identity and can't move forward. So reframe your idea of what discomfort is, that from it's this negative thing that I might experience to it's a signal that I'm growing, I'm evolving, I'm becoming a better person. So that's the second thing you can do. The third thing that I want you to think about is having a beginner's mindset. So here I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Only if you're not driving, doing something else that requires you to see. So if you need to see right now, you can just maybe pause and do this later, um, or just kind of try to do it with your eyes open, but it's not quite as effective. So I want you, if you can, to close your eyes and then try to visualize your first experiences in your sport, right? So whenever it is that you started taking lessons or however you got started. So maybe you were very young and you started taking lessons, or maybe you decided to just go for something as you were a little older and try it out for a team. Maybe you didn't even have that much experience in the sport, but you wanted to get to know it and to learn it. And so remember what it was like to be a clean slate at that moment. You were open to learning and experiencing because it was all new to you and you were curious about what that sport was like and how it would feel in your body and how you got to interact with other people there. And now think about how that all worked out. So if you're listening to this podcast, you were probably a high performing athlete in that sport and you started as a beginner, not knowing anything about it or having any experience. And with that beginner's mindset, you were open to new experiences and learning from others. That's how you learned your sport. That's how you got good at it. And it served you well back then. Let that serve you well now. Approach potentially uncomfortable experiences with a beginner's mindset. So let go of all the stories you've told yourself about why it's a bad idea and what negative things could possibly happen. Maybe. A lot of times we tell ourselves stories about, oh, well, this could happen or this could happen, but the chances that it's going to are probably pretty small. And so let go of all of that. Fully experience a new situation in the present moment with curiosity and without judgment or expectation on how it will go, right? If we go into something thinking like, oh, this is going to go terribly wrong, it probably will. And so don't go in with any expectations. Just be there to experience it as it is. It's with that childlike curiosity and that beginner's mindset that you can work through the uncomfortable. if it does occur, and take it full advantage of that teachable moment or that growth opportunity. So adopt that beginner's mindset. The last thing I want to talk about here is practicing mindfulness. So this is kind of a related note to what we were just talking about, but developing mindfulness can be a powerful tool in getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Mindfulness is a practice where you purposely focus on the present moment without judgment. And when you notice what's coming up for you in the present moment, any thoughts, emotions, stories, future expectations, all of those things that our minds do, and you notice those without making judgments about them as positive or negative, and just acknowledging them for what they are. And what they are just fluctuations of your mind. It really changes your perspective and your reaction to uncomfortable moments. So when you think about, you have a thought or you have a feeling that maybe doesn't feel great, just noticing that that's just a thought or that's just an emotion. It's just my mind doing what my mind does. And when you can look at it in this more objective way, it's much easier to not react to those things and to take actions that are in your best interest. So I'm sure you've heard this saying, it's about the journey, not the destination. That's what mindfulness can help you do. It allows you to focus on the experience or the process instead of the outcome. And there's benefit and value in the experience that you can miss out on if your focus is only on getting through the discomfort so you can reach the final outcome. Like, I just got to get through this. And there's this other thing over here that I'm working towards. But you might miss some important stuff if you're so focused on the outcome and not on what's actually happening right now. So practicing mindfulness is a really great way to be able to take these actions and to lean into things that maybe you wouldn't have done before and do it in a way that's going to benefit you. So there's many ways to practice mindfulness, and I talk about a lot of these in a blog post that I wrote called The Benefits of Mindfulness for Former Athletes. And so I'll link that in the show notes, and I encourage you to read that to learn ways to incorporate this powerful practice into your life because it really is life-changing. Okay, so to sum up what we just talked about, your growth and evolution as a retired athlete is very much influenced by your willingness to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we talked about some strategies to embrace this process. So recognize that you did this as an athlete, right? That this is not a new thing for you. You did it in the context of your sport, and that makes it a little easier to do it outside of your sport in your post-sport life. Second thing, redefine discomfort. So look at it as something that occurs when you're growing, when you're evolving. Adopt a beginner's mindset and practice mindfulness. And when you incorporate these strategies, I think you're really going to find that a whole new world opens up to you. So, on that note, I encourage you today maybe to think about something that you've been putting off or that you have thought, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. That just seems weird. It seems uncomfortable, or it seems like not something that I want to do, even though maybe these cool things could happen as a result. Think about doing it anyway, right? And seeing what happens and leaning into discomfort in the service of creating a more fulfilling life for yourself after sports. I'm going to pop a link in the show notes here for a meditation practice that focuses on getting comfortable being uncomfortable. It may not be for everybody, and I know a lot of people listen to podcasts while they're driving and doing other things, and that doesn't really lend itself to meditating, but I want you to maybe have the opportunity to do it at a time where you can really settle into the present moment and focus on it. So I'm going to link it in the show notes. I thought about doing it as part of this podcast, but I want to make it available to you. So I'm just going to do it separately. So I highly encourage you to check that out. It's short, it's accessible. Anybody can do it. Anybody can meditate. So if you want to check that out, check it out. And that is all I have for today. So I truly, truly appreciate you listening to this podcast today. And I hope that you've taken something from this. You're maybe inspired to lean into some discomfort, to try something different, to try something unfamiliar, and see where you end up with it. So until next time, keep evolving, and I'll see you in the next episode. You have officially crossed the finish line of this episode of the Vintage Athlete Podcast. Congrats. I hope you're feeling empowered to live your best life after sports. And remember, you are not alone in this journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback not only helps improve this podcast, but also helps other retired athletes find our community. Stay connected with me on Instagram at vintage.athlete for daily tips, inspiring stories, and to share your own experiences. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being a part of the Vintage Athlete team. Together, let's continue to find balance, build fitness, and redefine success in this exciting new chapter. I'm Tara Fortier, and I can't wait to connect with you again next time. Until then, keep evolving and keep creating your legacy beyond the game. Take care, and see you next time on the Vintage Athlete Podcast.